Hello, and welcome to the Sailing and Cruising the East Coast of the United States podcast. I'm Bela Musits.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
This is our podcast about sailing the East Coast of the United States. In some episodes, we'll focus on passages and destinations. In other episodes, we'll talk about boats, equipment, and techniques. And once in a while, when we come across an interesting person, we'll try to get them as a guest on the show. But before we dive into this episode, we need to say a special thank you to our supporters. Several listeners are supporting the podcast via Patreon. If you would like to join them, you can do so by going to patreon.com/sailingtheeast.
Great. And Bela, thanks. Great to see you. And thanks to our supporters. It's really important to us. And I'll tell you, I'm looking out my window here, and it's a cold and clammy day here in December here in Germany. And I think it's even colder in parts of the US right now. But I'm kind of excited that maybe some conversation about sailing can help warm us up a little bit. So fill me in. Who's our guest today, Bela?
Today we have a repeat guest, Carter Yepsen. He was a guest on episode 28 back in May of 2021. And he was getting ready to do his first charter with his wife. And so the podcast sort of focused on how can I make this first sailing experience for my wife a positive one. And I remember we sort of did a follow-up as part of that. And, he said that after that first charter experience, they were already planning their next one. Well, the planning the next one turned into just buying a boat. So Carter dove in head first into the sailing pond, so to speak, him and his wife. And so they did one charter. I think they actually did another one, and then they ended up buying a boat. So this podcast is sort of Carter's experience, his first year experience of sailing the boat all around the East Coast or the Northeast of the United States.
Yeah, I remember Carter, and I'm interested to hear kind of this whole part of the story because it was a really fascinating episode back in 2021. So let's get right to our interview with Carter Yepsen.
Hey, Carter, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, good morning, Bela.
Yeah, nice to see you again. So last time you were on the podcast, if I read my notes correctly, was on episode 28. Back in May of 2021, so a couple of years ago. And at that time, you had just gotten back from the BVI, from the first charter experience you and your wife had together. You had chartered many times before. You're a longtime sailor, but this was sort of the first time you and Carrie, your wife, went out on a charter down to BVI. And that episode is sort of all about that experience. And I remember the way you closed that episode was you were planning your next charter down in Florida. And here it is, over 2 years later, and you now have a boat.
Right.
So chartering turned into buying a boat. And I know this past summer you sailed all around Narragansett Bay, Buzzards Bay, Long Island Sound, and up the Hudson River to Lake Champlain. So that's sort of the stuff I want to talk about. So
Great.
First, just sort of tell me how you got from chartering to, okay, we're going to buy a boat.
Yeah. Well, so that was sort of in the back of my mind all along. If everything, worked out and went according to plan. I'd grown up sailing and cruising on Long Island Sound. So it was sort of in my retirement plan. So just to make sure that it was the right plan, I started taking the ASA classes, up through ASA, American Sailing Association 104 and 105, and spent a little bit more time on good sized boats. This was up on Lake Champlain, and that all felt good. So then, as retirement plans fell into place, we sold the family home and downsized a house, and part of the get well plan was to buy a small house and balance it out with a sailboat. So in the fall of 2022, we started looking at sailboats. And, that was a great experience, a great learning experience. And then in around November, came across a boat that was not on the list of the types of sailboats I was looking at, and fell in love and bought the boat. And spent a good part of last winter getting the boat ready to go. It was a much older boat than we were looking at. Didn't need anything major, but just needed a lot of little minor tweaks that the survey uncovered. And it was down in Mystic, Connecticut, about 4 hours from where we live. So when I wasn't skiing up at Gore Mountain, I would be down there at Mystic, working on the boat, doing a long laundry list of things to get it ready. So.
Excellent. So what boat did you end up buying?
We bought a 1988 Sabre 38 Mark II.
Okay, excellent. So tell us a little bit about the boat, draft, layout inside.
Yeah, it's a real sailing. It's a sailing machine. It's got a fin keel, draws 6.6. It has a nice complement of sails. The boat is in very, very good shape, taken care of at the Mystic Shipyard for 20 years. And so every year they would pull it and take the mast down. All the rigging and standing and running rigging was in great shape, good sails. It has a leisure furl boom. So it's pretty well set up for single handing, which is part of my plan as well. Has a big diesel, it's been repowered. And what I did is updated some of the electronics. I put AIS in it after listening to your podcast. I took some of your advice. Just basically the survey uncovered things that you might find in an older boat. So I went through and started replacing all the hose clamps, a couple of the hoses, a couple of electrical items on the boat just needed updating and refreshing. But the plan was on May 1st that the boat was launched before May, back in the water, splashed before May 1st. But I went down on May 1st. I'd hired a captain for 5 days who I'd met up on Lake Champlain, and he came down, squeezed me in between deliveries. He's a real working captain. Squeezed me in to spend 5 days with me, setting the boat up and putting the sails on. And on my first couple days with my wife Carrie, our first couple days sailing, just to make sure everything worked right. It's nice to have an experienced set of eyes, hands, ears, with you. So we set off on a real chilly May 3rd, and I set off for 9 weeks sailing.
Wow. So I think this notion of hiring a captain to take you for, and help you set things up, et cetera, I think is a really good one. And you sort of talked about that a little bit when you talked about your chartering experience, where you were on a new boat, or new to you certainly, and you said you had wished you had hired a captain to go out with you for 2 or 3 hours, just to sort of, because reading the manuals and lifting up covers to look at things is one thing, but actually sailing the boat and actually knowing where all switches are and turning the switches and opening the valves, and all that stuff is different. So that was really good. Okay, so you left Mystic.
Yep.
And where'd you go? How was that sort of untying the lines on your boat and kind of sailing away from the dock? How was that feeling?
Yeah, I wish I could say it felt great, but I think I was pretty tired because we'd worked hard, and I think I was overwhelmed and sort of mentally exhausted. And of course, the first day we set out to sail 30 miles when it's 45 degrees. And so I was tired, little overwhelmed, honestly. I mean, I was ecstatic, but there were so many things going through my mind, and making lists of things to do every day, as well as things we discovered on the boat, little things that needed to be done. Yeah, I was overwhelmed for the first couple of days.
Yeah. So how was that first day? How was the weather? How was the sailing experience, et cetera?
Yeah, the weather, it was a beautiful day. Again, 45 degrees when we set out. So I was wearing a ski hat and gloves, ski mittens and the like. But, a bluebird day, blue skies. following winds, and yeah, just fabulous. And we
Yeah.
sailed out Mystic and headed east, went through the race towards, and the goal was Narragansett Bay. We wanted to get up into Narragansett Bay. We didn't make it too far. We were just, it was tired. We were a little tired. And again, our timing was dictated by the current through the race, so we couldn't get going as early as we wanted. It would have been foolish. So we pulled into Jamestown, which is tucked just across from Newport, Rhode Island, and grabbed a mooring around 6 o'clock that night. And it was beautiful. I watched the moon come up, and it was fabulous.
Yeah. Now, for those folks who are not familiar with Long Island Sound, tell us what the race is and why timing is important.
Okay, yeah, the race is, yeah, if you sail Long Island Sound, you know what the race is. There is an area off of Mystic and Stonington between the Connecticut shore and Long Island, which is a little further south, where it narrows and there's a big island right in the middle of it. And all the current, all the water that comes out of the Atlantic wants to seek its way down Long Island Sound, but it has to go through this narrower area called the race. And the currents can be terrific. It can be easily four knots or more. And it's a little narrow, so I mean, you have to sort of thread the needle just right. You can't make a mistake going through there. But if you time it right, you can get speed over ground. I think our speed over ground was nine knots, and we weren't even trying.
Yeah.
So you can make really good time. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because that is like you said, everyone who sails Long Island Sound, Block Island Sound knows about the race. But for those folks, for those listeners who are not aware of that, it's one of those places where you got to think about the tidal currents. And it's interesting because in some parts of the East Coast, some parts of the world, tidal currents are fundamentally almost non-existent. and so you don't even think about them. And I grew up sailing on a lake. We didn't have any tidal currents to worry about. And then all of a sudden you got this other degree of complexity. Well, you don't want to go there, today between these hours, because the current's going to either push you or pull you in the wrong direction.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's another one of those things you got to be aware of. And some places when you sail, you don't think about those, but other places you got to really pay attention.
Yeah, it was a big part of every day's planning process.
Yeah,
it's one thing to get the charts out, but yeah, the Eldridge guide. I slept with that right by my pillow, because you read that every day. If you don't know what the Eldridge guide is, it's the guide to tides and currents throughout the East Coast.
Yeah, and a lot of the new apps, Navionics, other apps give you the tidal currents at specific times. So some of that stuff is built in. So some of the modern navigation apps. So that's great. So first night in Jamestown, which is a nice mooring field. You can overlook sort of Newport and the bridge and stuff. It's a beautiful place. And
so I got to say, throughout that Jamestown area, off of Jamestown, and there's several marinas there. There's probably, I'm going to say 500 moorings, and they were all 5 boats. So
yeah,
we realized it was a little early, and we woke up the next day. It was 45 degrees, but the weather had changed, and the wind was howling. A north wind coming down Narragansett Bay, and 20-25 knots, gust to 30, spit and rain. And so it wasn't as enjoyable on the second day. So we had just a reefed foresail, and we were tacking 6 knots up into the bay. Cold, but I was having more fun on that day. I think some of the pressure was off, and the boat handled great. But tacking under the big bridge there, it was exciting.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, that mooring field at Jamestown boatyard is not super well protected from the north.
Correct.
Yeah.
And actually, what we did before we took off is we practiced picking up moorings for about an hour before
Yeah.
we sailed off. He said,
Yeah.
this is as good a chance as ever for you to really get to know the boat, and so that was real good practice.
Yeah, particularly when there's no other boats around, right? All
No
the
other
mooring
boats
balls are
around,
there.
lots of moorings to
Right.
pick from, and
So-
and nasty weather. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah. So if you missed, it's okay. No big deal. Super. So where'd you go from there? Where'd you go from Jamestown?
We went up to Wickford.
Wickford.
Not
Oh yeah.
Warwick,
Okay.
but Wickford.
Yep.
And that was the first time we ran aground. So I did run
Second day.
aground. I'll be honest, 5 times on my trip, but
Whoa.
luckily none of them going more than 1 knot.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and this one was my fault. There it was on the charts. I grew up sailing with paper charts, and a compass and binoculars, and so using the navionics. I mean, there was a little X on the navionics chart that I didn't click on, so I didn't know that there was a rock in the harbor.
Yeah.
We bumped it. I mean, nothing bad, but we bumped it.
Yeah. Yeah. The zoom level is important in these digital charts because stuff disappears and then
Right.
magically reappears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was great. We had a nice slip we pulled into, so we were protected from the wind, and practiced docking the boat, and that went real well. And it was great little towns, along the shores of the Narragansett Bay. So
yeah, both Jamestown is a beautiful little town. It's a half-hour walk from Jamestown Boatyard, the moorings there. And Wickford is a really nice, cute little town as well, and a short walk from most marinas in the bay there. So that's really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, so we day sailed around that area, and then the following day we went back to Jamestown and stayed. And there wasn't much wind, but it was real nice and sunny, and just stayed at the mooring for 2 nights. And then I had to sail back to Mystic to drop Carrie off, my wife, where her car was. So to time the current through the race, we had to leave Jamestown, Safe Harbor, at around 5:30 a.m. and to sail down to Point Judith and round the point, and then make it to the race with the current again.
Yeah.
So we sailed back to Mystic, stayed at another Safe Harbor marina. So I'm a member of Safe Harbor and Willsboro Bay up in Lake Champlain. So it's a great deal to stay at Safe Harbor marinas, and most of them had space during this time of year, of course, because they're just getting opened.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Carrie, your spouse, leaves, and now you're doing some solo sailing
for a couple of weeks. So the following morning I left bright and early for Block Island. That was my first big solo sail, and left around 6 a.m. I think, and pulled into Block Island around 11 a.m. So a great sail.
Wow.
Just wonderful. I didn't tack the whole way, and I pull in and expect to find a mooring, and I call the harbor master and say, "I'm sorry, the moorings aren't in yet." Oh. Yeah, so the marinas were hardly open as well. So I ended up anchoring for a couple days, and then the wind came up, and it was blowing 25 to 30. And that's a big anchorage in Block Island harbor there, and so that wasn't a lot of fun. But a couple other boats came in after I did, so there were about 5 boats anchored in that whole big area. But I spent 2 nights there to wait for the wind to calm down.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about solo sailing. What do you do differently solo sailing versus when you have crew on the boat?
Yeah, a fair amount of planning up front. No, I have to have everything written down on a notepad that I'm going to need to know, because I really won't have time to go look up phone numbers. And so I have my route all planned out, and basically crib notes, a cheat sheet of where I'm going. I prepare all my meals and a thermos of tea and snacks and everything like that. So because I plan that I'm going to be at the helm for 6 hours. Yeah, any extra clothes and stuff, I have it all set out so I can grab it easily. And then, I wear a harness and slip into jack lines religiously. And if it's windy, I keep a radio and my phone on my person. So if something did happen, I can I can call somebody. I can call somebody. I keep a knife on me if I need to cut myself loose. So I basically equip myself very differently.
Yeah.
And it's a different mindset as well.
Yeah. I've done a little bit of solo sailing, not a lot. But it's interesting you talk about a route sheet, because I started making route sheets when we first started chartering, because a lot of places where the charter boats were, I had to weave my way out of a channel or something. And when you're steering the boat, like you said, you can't get distracted. You got to know where you are. And I found those route sheets to be really, really helpful. I'd put buoy numbers on them, like what comes next, what the distance is, what the heading is, how long it should take me to get there, etc. And it's a quick reference. I just look at it and I go, okay, boom, I know where I am, and I know what's coming next. I know what's around the corner. And the other piece is, even though you have an autopilot, I assume you have an autopilot.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So do I. You still, particularly when you're close to shore and you're in Narragansett Bay, you really can't leave the helm for more than like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're 10 miles offshore, you can go take a nap if you want. But when you're close to shore and doing that near shore sailing, man, you can't leave the helm. It's busy. And at least I don't feel comfortable leaving the helm.
Right.
And so, you got to have your meals prepared. You got to have all your clothes out. You got to kind of think through all of that stuff in advance. And I found the most important part of this solo sailing is the planning you do in advance and the preparation you do in advance. So that's great. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and I even, especially when I get to my destination, what buoys or marks am I looking for? What's my heading going to be? What radio channels I reach out to the harbor master on, or other sources of information? What time they close? What the harbor master's name is, what the phone number is, if for some reason they don't answer the radio, because again, it was early in the year, and a lot of times they're not sitting at their desk at this time of year. They're out and about doing things.
Right. And people say, I'll just look that information up on my phone. Well, you might not have cell service there.
Right.
So writing all that stuff down in advance, I think, is really, really important. Well, that's great. So a couple days in Block Island, and then where'd you blaze off to?
Then I sailed to Westport, Massachusetts. There are lots of Westports. Westport, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, Westport, Mass, and it's a great little harbor. Sort of tricky to get into, a long channel, wicked currents, but some of the best oysters, and that's a real beautiful beaches, great harbor. And from Westport, I sailed out to Cuttyhunk. So Cuttyhunk was one of, again, as a sailor's, bucket list place that when I was growing up, that's where my parents and I would sail to. I hadn't been back in 40 some years, so it was nice to get back. I was just looking through pictures last night, and the picture I took of Cuttyhunk Harbor from up on the hill, my boat was the only boat on a mooring in Cuttyhunk Harbor. And if people don't know Cuttyhunk Harbor, it fills on a weekend, it fills up by 10 a.m. You can't get a spot. People raft. So it was pretty unusual to have the place to myself. And the legendary Cuttyhunk Raw Bar was open for all of 1 hour from 4:30 to 5:30. Had just one night in Cuttyhunk, and then left Cuttyhunk and sailed up to Padanarum up in Buzzards Bay, and spent a week bopping around Buzzards Bay, and just iconic harbors up along on Buzzards Bay with just beautiful boats. And every boat's beautiful, but in Buzzards Bay, some of these harbors they're pretty special. Lots of old Concordia yawls and the like. So
Yeah, it really is. New England is really a place to explore that has a lot of character, and each little harbor sort of has its own personality and character and sort of neat things about it.
Yeah. And so I started up on Buzzards Bay. I was staying at yacht clubs. You could get a mooring at one of these iconic yacht clubs for not a lot of money, and you get to use the club's facilities, and that was kind of nice.
Yeah,
I felt pretty special being able to do that.
Yeah, you didn't happen to go into Marion Yacht Club, did you?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, what a great place that is. Nice little town. And
love Marion. Yeah, gorgeous town. I hit Marion on the way north as well as a month later on the way south.
Yeah, that's a great place. People, we've stayed there. People are really friendly, and just a nice place.
So on weekends in the end of May, fast forwarding a couple weeks, Buzzards Bay started to get pretty busy.
Mm.
And it had a very different vibe than Narragansett Bay. It's wavier for whatever reason, or it just seemed like it was a little tougher sailing, and a lot of power boats, a lot of fishing boats, a lot of charter fishing boats, as well as you have the traffic coming up and down the canal, the Cape Cod Canal. So you had to really be on your toes, or I had to be on my toes in Buzzards Bay.
Yeah, and you're still solo, right? And you're still solo.
I'm still solo. Carrie would come down for a weekend every other weekend, and we might sail a little bit, or we just take advantage of staying on the boat, and we'd have a rest day. One thing I'll bring up is that I found I needed a rest day after every 3 or 4 days, or after just a real hard day. I had a couple days where the wind was really howling, and I'm standing for 5-6 hours at the helm, and just doing everything by yourself. I just found that I needed a down day, to recoup mentally and physically. So
yeah. Let me ask you a question. Did anything break? Any sort of minor oh crap moments?
Yeah, nothing major at all. As part of my daily routine, I would go around and looking in the bilge under all the hatches and take the cover off the engine and poke around. So one time I did see a little grease spray in the engine compartment. So there's a rubber boot that goes over the universal joint that had slipped off. So I had to slip it back on, and I couldn't find the right type of clamp, so I had to use a stainless steel clamp. But to do that right, it took an hour or two. I'm glad I caught it when I did. So that was something that slowed me down. Cleaning the seawater strainer that provides the cool water for the engine. I was trying to unscrew a plastic drain plug, and it snapped off in my hand halfway out. So I think that happened on Memorial Day weekend, and trying to find a part in a small town. Basically it was sort of a non-starter when the marinas weren't open to call anybody. So I sort of jury rigged it using some other types of parts. Basically I found the screw was the same type of threading that my hatches use for a little locking nut. And so after 2 hours of gnashing my teeth and problem solving, put it back together, and it's still like that today.
Yeah.
So those are the things. So little things that would have or could have, wouldn't have kept me from sailing, but would have kept me from using the motor. Things like that. A couple lines that I opted to change, proactively. So I ordered some lines from New England Ropes and had them, shipped to Carrie, and she brought them out to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, nothing broke. Knock on wood.
Oh, nice. And let me ask you another question. So particularly when you're solo and you're saying, okay, I'm going to go from Mystic, and I want to work my way up to Buzzards Bay. How many miles? What was sort of your? How many miles am I going to do a day? Sort of. How did you make those sort of decisions? How do you make your weather decisions? When was like okay, nope, this is the weather, I'm not going. If it's above this, I'm staying put. If it's below this, I'm going. Talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, and I learned as I went along, what my comfort range was.
Yeah.
I had a saying that I follow when I'm on the boat, whether I'm solo or not, and that's wind, weather, and whim. Sort of in that order, or maybe it's weather, wind, whim, in that order. So if the weather's not good, you don't go. If the wind is too strong or not enough, well, that changes your plan. And then the third thing is, where do you want to go? So you don't pick where you want to go and then and then worry about the other two. Even though I had sort of a general plan, I realized that it's nicer to have a destination that's not too far. It's better to have one that's too close, and then just sail a little bit. So I found, like in Narragansett Bay, it's great sailing. I wouldn't have to take the quickest way to get from Warwick to Battleship Cove. I can sail around. So I'd like to be sailing for maybe 5 hours, 6 hours max. I mean, a couple of days were longer than that, but I just found, if I leave at 9 and I pull in and I'm on the hook at 2 or maybe 2:30, that's a great day for me. I can go down and have a nice nap, read my book, clean up and go shopping and cook a nice dinner and go to bed early. So that was my sweet spot. I found, was 5 to 6 hours solo was plenty for me.
Yeah, excellent. I think the other piece that gives you is that if for some reason you are delayed, or you break down, or things go slower, you're running 4 knots instead of 5.5.
Yeah,
you're not getting into the dark, right? You have that buffer on the back end.
Sure.
Of your planning, which I think is really important, to have that buffer, particularly on the back end, because if you go slower or you run into some problems or something, you're not then, oh my gosh, I got to get to the harbor, I got to get to the marina before they close, or I got to rush to get somewhere because a weather front's going to come through at 6 o'clock, and right. I thought I was going to get in at 3, but now it looks like I'm getting in at 5:30. So I think that buffer on the back end is really, really key.
Yeah. So later on, I mean, 2 times in my trip, I had a buddy along with me for a few days on each time, and then I found I could do longer.
Yeah, sure.
Than somebody to take the wheel.
Yeah.
And it again, just physically, mentally, I could relax for an hour or 2. And that made all the difference. So then I could do, 30 plus mile days, nautical mile days, sailing were fine. Or when we were motoring, coming up the Hudson and the Champlain Canal later on, we did 60 miles. It was typical for our days.
Yeah. The other thing that I like to do particularly when I'm planning these longer legs, is I sort of think about the bailout points along the way. Yeah. So if the weather pipes up more than I'm comfortable with, let's say I'm planning a 50-mile day, is there some place at 10 or 20 miles I can bail out, or 30 miles I can bail out, and kind of have the route sheet for that all sort of planned out as well, because if you're bailing out, that probably means things are not going great.
Right.
So that's the other thing that I often kind of plan out in advance.
Yeah. A couple, my plan B, or in a couple places, I just had to motor. 1 or 2 days, the wind was just, small craft warnings, like a knucklehead, I said, "Oh, it's 15 to 20 knots, small craft warnings. It can't be that bad." Well, it was that bad.
Yeah.
And so just I opted to drop the sails and just put the big diesel to work and get to where I needed to go.
Yeah. Okay. So we've made it up to Buzzards Bay. Did you end up going through the canal?
Yeah. Yeah. And that was a learning experience. So I had read lots about the Cape Cod Canal. It's very well documented in Eldridge about the tides and currents. And again, the current can whip through there at a good 4+ knots on any given day. And you definitely have to time it because the currents and the waves, particularly on both ends of the canal, can be interesting. So I had timed the current just right. And it was a strong current at that time. So, there's a speed limit on the Cape Cod Canal as well. So I was going just under the speed limit. And but what I did not check was the wind. Even though it wasn't terribly windy, the wind was coming directly on the current. So when I exited the canal, it was at the maximum current, and the wind was up at that point in the day. And I met some, the highest standing waves that I'd seen in a long time, or maybe ever, exiting the canal. Maybe I'm just getting 7-8 feet, or my little boat was just, riding up these things and crashing down.
Yeah. Yeah.
So not a lot of fun. And frankly, when we got to the marina up in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and we pulled in, and the dock master said, "Wow, I'm sort of surprised to see you. I didn't think you would be coming through the canal on a day like today." And sure enough, there weren't any other boats going through the canal that day.
Yeah. Here again,
I'm very differently on the way back. Now I'm a pro at the Cape Cod Canal.
yeah. Well, we talked about the notion of these tidal currents, and the races, the canal, a lot of these entrances into harbors. You got to think about that stuff, and it's not, and as you just experienced, not just the flow of the water, but also the flow of the air across the water.
Yeah. So I kept reminding myself, take it easy. Don't get mad at yourself. You're a rookie at this, really. So that was a mistake.
Yeah.
On the way back, I hit because I had the same wind situation. I made sure when I exited the canal, it was at slack tide. Not right in the middle of the tide.
Max flow. Yeah. Excellent. And so Plymouth, and then where to from Plymouth?
Plymouth, up to Situate, another fabulous, little on the South Shore of Boston. A great little, great marina, beautiful boats, wonderful little town. And then from Situate along sail, across Cape Cod Bay, across Boston, Boston in the distance, and pulling into Marblehead, another epic little sailing harbor. Unfortunately, at this time, I think if you recall in the spring, we had the forest fires in Canada making the adding a lot of haze to the atmosphere. So I could barely see Boston through the haze.
Wow.
Yeah, great sail across to Marblehead, and then from Marblehead up to Gloucester. And that's when my buddy got off the boat in Gloucester. And then we had 3 bad days of weather in Gloucester. So I just stayed right on the mooring in the inner harbor in Gloucester, hunkered down.
So Carter, you made it up to Gloucester, I think it was, or was it Gloucester was the furthest north you went?
Yes.
Okay. And then you sort of turned around and start heading south and eventually up to Lake Champlain. So let's pick it up from there.
Yeah, so I sort of broke my trip into 2 parts. The first part was getting to know the boat, and exploring Narragansett Bay and Buzzards Bay, Cape Cod Bay, South Shore, North Shore, Boston. And then part 2 was, heading home. So it's sort of a different mindset for me. and I was solo during this part of the trip. So I knew I needed to be in New York City in about 10 days. I sort of broke that trip down into chunks and sailed off. So I felt different during this part of the trip. I mean, I had to put miles, under the keel to get to where I needed to be, but I felt pretty confident. And it was really nice pulling back into many of the same harbors I had pulled into on the way north. So I knew my way into to Marion. I knew my way into Padanaram and to Westport, Massachusetts, and I pulled into Stonington, Mystic. It was great. And I had great winds, really nice weather for most of that trip. As I got down further down Long Island Sound, I did have a spate of some really strong winds again, with following seas, and probably the most white knuckle sailing I had the whole trip. Where basically I'm on a furled Genoa, and I'm still doing 7 knots and big waves behind me, and I'm strapped in. I even put the hatches in the companionway because the boat was going left and right, sideways 25 degrees, as well as cruising up and down these waves. And I was the only boat out there. I mean, I was listening to some radio chatter of some of the fishermen, saying it's supposed to be 2 to 3s out here, and it's 4 to 5s, and when if there's a 4 to 5 foot, that's the regular waves. Every once in a while, you'll get something a lot bigger than that. So that felt good to pull into Stamford, to Yacht Haven in Stamford, Connecticut, and I stayed an extra day there to rest and wait for that weather to go through. My daughter actually lives in New York City, came up and joined me for a sail from Stamford into City Island. And we stayed at the City Island Yacht Club, a real old-fashioned, funky, great yacht club, real friendly people. And we stayed there for a couple days and enjoyed City Island. And then another buddy, Terry Haas, who's a ski patrol buddy of ours, joined me for the trek up the Hudson and up the Champlain Canal.
Yeah. So you went through Hell's Gate, the East River, around the south tip of Manhattan. I hope it wasn't smoky and you had a good view.
Yeah, we had a pretty well. What happened then was the rains of late June. I don't know if you recall. It rained for a week, and rained hard, and thunderstorms, and so the weather was not great, and no wind, just rain. But the trek down through Hell Gate, was terrific. With my daughter, with a horn on the shore as we cruised by, and that was really nice. And the trek up the Hudson was great. I mean, there was a lot of debris in the river from those rains. Several of the creeks coming into the Hudson had, overflown their banks. So we had to be pretty vigilant of looking for tree trunks and various things floating in the river.
Yeah. I gotta talking about the East River and Hell's Gate. It sort of reminds me of the first time I went through there, and subsequent times, was probably the most stress is maybe the wrong word, but sensory overload that I've ever had, because there's high-speed ferry boats, there's barges, there's pleasure boats, there's tugboats, there's helicopters flying around, there's airplanes, there's police boats. It was just so much stuff going on. I found it just, sensory overload. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was just, second time through is a little better, of course, right? The first time is always a challenge with many of these things.
Sure.
And it gets real wavy in there because of all the boat traffic, and there's seawalls on both sides. So the waves just kind of bounce around like a pinball going back and forth through there. And you're trying to move over for a big freighter coming or something, or a barge. Oh God, I found it to be really
and now
challenging.
We have AIS, which sends an alarm off anytime you're in a path of another boat. So the alarms are going off. It's funny. So in City Island, we spent a couple days there, And everybody you talk to, and, you know, they ask, where are you from? Where are you going? Everybody has a different opinion about Hellgate, about when you should go, when you definitely shouldn't go. And it was pretty funny at the end. We were, you know, if I took everybody's advice, we never would have gone.
Right.
But yeah,
Right.
it turned out to be actually pretty benign when we went through. Again, if you look at Eldridge, and you can study it based on the phase of the moon, the current through Hellgate it varies dramatically. So we hit it at the right time. There wasn't a ton of current, and we hit it right at max flow. And actually, it was great. We made really good time. And other than the ferries, and our craning our necks, looking at all the sites, you know, it was fine.
So from City Island down through the East River, up around the tip of Manhattan, heading up the Hudson River, where was your first stop after City Island?
It was about 60 miles away, and it was called Haverstraw.
Oh, okay.
So it's a nice marina. It's a safe harbor marina. So they stayed open late for us because we're running, you know, the currents weren't perfect, but after a while they turned, and so we pulled into Haverstraw all around 6 o'clock, and they very nicely stayed open so we could get fuel and a pump out, and
nice.
Slip there, and then headed out early the next morning for a marina called Hoponose, which is south of Albany, and then early the next morning they took the mast down at Hoponose. Yeah.
So what were sort of, in addition to because of all the rain, the floating debris in the Hudson River, what were some of the other challenges you found going up the Hudson River?
Well, for us in particular, we're watching the radar for lightning. You know, there were thunderstorms and lightning on both sides, on the Catskill side and over on the Berkshire side of things. There wasn't a lot of traffic, so it was really just, you know, it was really a wonderful trip. Yeah.
Yeah, and you go by West Point there, and you go by some really sort of classic towns and villages with personality and big mansions sitting out looking over the Hudson River.
Yeah, it was nice because I had a buddy along who loved to take the helm. You know, allowed me to read little, do Wikipedia and read about the history of the different buildings or mansions or colleges, along the way. I had read a book earlier in the year about the sloops of the Hudson when sailboats moved the cargo up and down the Hudson, based on the wind and largely the current. And it was, just interesting to see the different harbors that they would pull into and leave from.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. So you got your mast down, and the reason you got to take the mast down is because going up through the canals, whether it's the Erie Canal and you're heading out to the Great Lakes, or you're going up the Champlain Canal up to Lake Champlain, the bridges are low.
Yeah.
So it doesn't work for sailboats. So you got to take your mast down. So how did that go?
It went pretty well. I mean, it's a little stressful the first time you do it. We had to scramble around and build the stands for the boat. So, they have lumber you can buy, and some tools you can use, and some, good advice. So, once the mast was down and on the boat and strapped down, we took off around 11 a.m. to try to, make our next destination. So, stressful, but it's really just the stress of watching it done.
Yeah. And that was next destination Troy?
Actually, it was a marina just south of Albany.
Oh, okay.
I think Shady Harbor. And then we could set out bright and early, pick up fuel at the Albany Yacht Club, and make the Troy lock, the Federal lock in Troy, around 11 a.m.
Yeah.
And we made good time and made it up to Stillwater, New York. So I went through about 4 of the 11 locks on the first day.
So was this the first time that you had gone through some locks?
Yes.
So talk about that experience.
Yeah, there are great YouTubes on it. So, and I approached it with, eyes wide open and with a buddy who hadn't done it either, but we took it real slow. So, after the second time, it sort of became, a lot simpler. You approach it real slow. I mean, the currents are crazy. You put on rubber gloves. You put on, if you have covers for your fenders, you put on old covers on the fenders, and it worked out pretty well, actually. I think of all the times, I only had only one miscue where we didn't hit it right, and the current pushed us off the wall, and we had to back up and try again.
Did you make like a fender board?
I have one on board, and I didn't end up using it. I didn't find that we needed to use it.
Got it. And in the beginning, when you're entering, right, you're going up for the first so many locks.
Yeah.
And then you're after a while, the next set of locks, you're going down.
You're going down. Yeah.
So what's the difference? I mean, were there challenges with one versus the other, or are they pretty much the same? And you just, one of them you bring it in line, the other one you're letting the line out.
Yeah, I would say it's pretty similar.
Got it.
You basically you're grabbing hold of these real slimy lines, whether the water level is going up or going down. It was just two of us. It might have been nice to have a third person, but we were fine with it. What was interesting is on the second day, halfway through, we came up to a lock, and there were literally 10 boats clustered before the lock, and we couldn't pick up anything on the radio from the lock tender fellow. So we found a place to tie up, and talking to other boaters, it turns out that there was an oil spill in one of the locks, and the canal was closed, and they were waiting for the environmental protection people to come in. And when's it supposed to open? They said there's no ETA. So it did end up opening a few hours later, but the big difference was now we were going into the locks that were absolutely packed, people on both sides. By my mast is 55 feet long, so and other sailboats, similar. So I mean, we had masts overlapping in the while you're in the canal. That was pretty hairy for the last three locks. We were definitely on our toes. It was not what we bargained for, but everybody was nice and friendly. A lot of the power boaters want to get ahead of you. So they try to squeeze through as you're exiting the locks. Didn't make any difference because the canal wants to keep you all together as a group of boats anyway. But that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. So you break out of the canal and you're into Lake Champlain.
Yeah. I pulled into Chipman's Point Marina. Again, like Hoppano's, one of their main businesses is helping sailboats. And I stayed a couple days at Chipman's. I ran some new halyards in the mast while the mast was down, and they were really good at helping me do that. Put the mast up, took a day off, spent 4th of July at home, and then on July 5th, took the boat up Lake Champlain up to Willsboro Bay.
And that's now home, right?
Yeah, that's home for the time being. Yeah, it's wonderful up there.
Yeah, super. Yeah, I've done a lot of sailing on Champlain. It's a great lake to sail on, and people don't realize it. It's like 3 times longer than Narragansett Bay.
Yeah, you can go a long way.
You can go a long way. Yeah.
But it is sort of narrow, and the wind, as you know, the wind either like Narragansett Bay, it usually blows out of the north or blows out of the south.
Right. That's right. That's right. Well, super. Hey, so while we start thinking about wrapping this up, if someone listening to this and they say, "Hey, I'd like to try something like this," make a nice big circle from someplace in Long Island Sound up through Boston, back around, maybe through New York City, maybe not all the way up to Champlain, but into New York City or south of New York City. What sort of 2 or 3 pieces of advice would you give them?
Yeah, it's a great area to sail. So go for it. I guess it can get crowded, like winter in the BVI. It can get crowded. So have your trip planning done and know where you're gonna spend the night. Many of these harbors are completely different than others. Some are real mellow. I'll call them more working harbors, or more motorboats, and others are real sailboat harbors. They're all good, but very different vibe from harbor to harbor. So do your research depending on what you want to do. Some have great provisioning stores and chandleries, and others don't. So that type of planning is important. Get Eldridge and know how to use Eldridge real well.
Yeah. So in addition to Eldridge, what other resources did you find were the best for helping you plan this trip?
There are certainly a variety of blogs and some YouTube videos that were great. I'm a member of the Sabre forum. It's the Yahoo groups with great advice and of like-minded sailors, in similar sized boats. So that was very comforting to be able to rely on their wisdom. I like paper charts, and it's pretty tough to find paper charts these days. So one of my rituals would be every evening, with a cup of tea, I would sit down and spread the paper chart over the salon table and get my dividers out, and I'd have my predict wind application up, and I would do my route planning. But I like to do it looking at the big chart where I can see every my whole day's journey on 2 to 3 feet, rather than looking at a little Navionics app on an 11-inch screen. That was very comforting to me. Again, to have paper backup, but also just that's the way I like to visualize my route.
Yeah, amen to what you just said. I find there's nothing better than rolling out a chart on the table and being able to get the big picture. And because like I said, when you zoom in or zoom out on an 11 or 12-inch screen, man, you're missing stuff.
Yeah.
And I have chart books, which are okay, but I'm constantly flipping pages because that's only 15 inches by 15 inches, or 20 inches or by 20,
Right.
whatever it is. But those nice big 3 feet by 3 foot charts, I don't have any, except I have chart books, but I don't have any of those old-fashioned roll-up paper charts for any of the Long Island Sound. I used to have a bunch of them for parts of Long Island Sound, but unfortunately, I got rid of all of them.
Yeah,
I didn't have a boat for a long period of time.
And my boat came with a huge set of charts, and that was great. Another thing I would just encourage folks is to turn off the chart plotter, turn off the auto helm, and sail the boat and look around. There's so much history to those harbors and those areas. Shipwrecks, famous hurricanes, famous blizzards. So all around you and under you, there are centuries of history. So that's one thing I did, and I'm still doing. I did it before the trip, during the trip, and now I'm still doing is reading about the area, about the harbors and the storms. And and the lore.
Yeah. Yeah. If you like history and you like that kind of stuff, boy, what a rich environment to sail in.
Absolutely.
Super. Hey, that's a great way to end this, Carter. Thank you very much for being on the podcast again.
Oh, sure.
You were a great guest. I really, really enjoyed our conversation and catching up. And I'll see you soon on the slopes at Gore Mountain.
Awesome. Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks.
Bela, interesting interview. Again, part 2 is just as interesting as part 1. And it seems to me like you made a really interesting jump from chartering to boat ownership. And that first trip sounded great. What were your major takeaways from this this kind of the story that Carter did from chartering to owning his own boat?
Yeah, so I've known Carter for probably 15 years or so. We're both on the ski patrol at Gore. And Carter is one of those individuals, when he decides to do something, he jumps in head first. He dives right in. And he certainly dove into the sailing pond, so to speak. And so I thought that was great. And I think here the takeaways from my conversation with him are, it really struck me that what a great sailing destinations, sort of Long Island Sound, Block Island Sound, Narragansett Bay, Buzzards Bay, sort of up the coast near Boston. What great sailing grounds that really is. I think it's one of the best in the country. And oftentimes it's overlooked, I think. And, there's so many different places to explore. You can do this in sort of short hops. It's not like you got to go sail for 48 hours straight to go from Anchorage to Anchorage. It's really nice. A lot of great facilities, a lot of great attractions in and around where you're going to keep your boat, either at a marina or whether you're going to anchor. There's great places on land to explore. And so to me, that was one of the big takeaways. Man, this New England section of the East Coast of the United States really is a great place to explore and sail in.
Yeah, totally agree. And, I thought Carter's description of solo sailing was really interesting, and kind of the prep and the organization that he went through. There's always risks of this and special preparation and preventive maintenance. And we've done a few podcasts where you talked about solo sailing. Would you consider taking a longer trip like this on your own?
Probably not, because I don't know how to, when you say longer trip, I could do a day trip, and I've done day trips on my own.
Your own. Yeah.
But I would not do an overnight on my own.
No.
And I know myself, I know my body, I need my sleep. And I'm not gonna, there's plenty of solo sailors who go on, week-long trips by themselves. There's solo sailors who've sailed around the world nonstop. But that's not for me. So I know what my limitations are. I need my sleep, and it's just too dangerous. From my perspective, from the risk I'm willing to take. Other people, different things. They have different risk levels than I do. However, the thing that struck me about Carter is, he's an engineer / IT person, but he's very methodical in his preparation. And I think there's a real lesson there, right? He talked about prepping his meals before he goes, right? So when he has to go down below to get something, it's just go down there and get it and bring it back up. Because New England is busy. There's a lot of traffic out there, right? It's not like driving a car. There's not that much traffic, but you can probably almost always see another boat. And sometimes the other boats are big tankers, and you don't realize they're going 25 knots. They're going really fast. And so I think his diligence and his preparation it was a key takeaway for me, that he really thought that through. He was super well organized. He knew where he was going. He knew what the tides and currents were going to be, because that plays a role. Up here in New England, there's some narrower passages you have to go through. And if you're going in the wrong direction against the tide or the wind, it's going to take you a while. And so he sort of had all that stuff well thought out and well prepped. And I'll tell you, and I can't remember if Carter and I talked about this or not, but when I do things, I typically plan for about 4 hours of sailing. Now, if I'm doing a long passage with other people, it's a different thing. But if it's the kids and I, or Elaine and I, or even myself, I'm going to go from point A to point B, and I say to myself, okay, that should take me 4 hours. So if it takes me 6 or 7 or even 8, I'm not in trouble. I'm not pulling in at night or in the dark. So that's to the safety factor that I build in, that I'm pretty rigid about, because stuff can happen. And we've seen that in some other episodes. You know, I think with Simon and his son Sawyer, when they were pulling into France, right? When they were leaving the dock, they had planned out a long day sail, and then they left late because they had engine trouble, and then the winds and currents were different because they were late time wise, and they were pulling in the dark into a place they'd never been before. So you got to build buffer in, particularly on the back end. And I think, you know, Carter did a great job at that and sort of thinking all that through and really planning things well.
Yeah, I totally agree. These are great takeaways. What do you think? Should we wrap it up?
Sounds good, Mike.
Yeah, well, it was great to see Carter again on the podcast, and hopefully we have more adventures from him again soon. And listeners, thanks for joining us in yet another episode, and we hope that you found our conversation interesting and thought-provoking. If you have questions about what we've discussed, as always, please feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is sailingtheeast, that's all one word, @gmail.com.
Hey, and if you enjoy the podcast, please hit that follow button on your favorite podcasting application. And if you know someone that would be a good guest on the show, or if you think you'd be a good guest on the show, reach out to us at that email address, and maybe we'll have you as a guest. So signing off from snowy upstate New York. See you all soon.
And from over here in Münster, Germany, see you next time.